Oregon's second largest city during World War II, Vanport was created in the summer of 1942 as a consequence of Kaiser Shipyard's expanded wartime production. Kaiser opened their initial manufacturing facility in 1941, producing Liberty ships to meet an increased demand prompted by the naval war in the North Atlantic. Following the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and America's entry into the conflict, 2 additional facilities were added in the St. John's and Swan Island districts, accentuating a local housing shortage. Kaiser had imported more than 2,500 workers into the region, and over 10% were Black Americans. Affordable and available housing was a perpetual challenge for minorities in Portland since the city's inception. Public housing was dismissed as an unattractive option. Minorities were excluded from desirable neighborhoods by unspoken but understood prohibitions practiced by local realtors. Most were consigned to buying and renting in northeastern Portland neighborhoods, often in crowded and substandard conditions. Shipping magnate Henry Kaiser fashioned a hasty housing solution with long-term adverse consequences. During the summer of 1942, he purchased 650 acres of land located on the Willamette Delta, where the river enters into the Columbia River on the northern periphery outside of Portland. Kaiser's original aim was to construct 6,000 housing units with accompanying infrastructure. His ambition soon expanded into 10,000 units, and by August 1942, 5,000 workers began laying the foundation for construction. Initially, the town's intended name was Kaiserville, but was rechristened Vanport as a hybrid between neighboring Vancouver, Washington, and Portland. By December 1942, 700 units were completed and occupied. At the peak of wartime production, over 40,000 people inhabited Vanport. The majority were transient laborers with little in common except employment and a bond to contribute towards the war effort. Within the proximity of a single year, the entire community became the country's largest housing project and Oregon's second largest city. Approximately 40% of that population was Black. Segregation housing policies still restricted minorities into specific neighborhoods in Vanport, and an additionally constructed public housing project called Gilds Lake Housing. Accompanying street crime and juvenile delinquency was blamed on the Black influx, but much of the crime was conducted by soldiers and airmen from nearby military bases, the majority of whom were Caucasian. As World War II scaled down, an exodus of families began leaving at a rate of 100 per day. By the conclusion of the war, Vanport had lost more than half of its population, despite efforts to encourage relocation by returning veterans. The Vanport Extension Center would be constructed as an institution of higher education and later be renamed Portland State University. The population decline stabilized by 1948 until the community was abruptly obliterated and abandoned in a single afternoon. Following 2 major rainstorms during May and a larger than average seasonal snowmelt, high water levels threatened the levees and lowlands construction of Vanport. On Memorial Day, May 30, 1948, the Portland Housing Authority assured residents that the dikes were safe and sufficient evacuation time, if necessary, would be available. At 4:05 p.m., a 200-foot section of railroad beams holding back the Columbia River collapsed, unleashing a 10-foot wall of water. By nightfall, the city was completely underwater. 15 people were killed and over 17,500 inhabitants were left homeless. The remains of Vanport and the Gilds Lake housing projects were never resuscitated.